For many of us in America, receiving and learning to ride your first bicycle was a milestone of childhood. Mine was a blue and white Huffy, a Christmas present from my grandparents. I still remember the day the training wheels came off. My next bike was a hand-me-down 3-speed from an older cousin, and I cherished it. Those bikes got passed down to siblings. Then in grad school I bought a used 10-speed that survived 2 relocations before I sold it here in New Jersey 20 years ago. In the time since I sold my last bike, Americans have purchased an average of 17.4 million bicycles a year. At the same time, we've annually discarded millions. Many end up in landfills because no one seems to want used bikes anymore. Well, as we've heard on this show before, one man's trash can be another man's treasure, but sometimes it takes a DIY world improver to make that happen. Enter David Schweidenback of High Bridge, New Jersey, a former Peace Corps volunteer who founded Pedals for Progress. P4P is the world's largest recycler of bicycles, more than 136,000 during the past 22 years, including more than 3,200 so far this year. Dave is a CNN hero and the recipient of numerous awards, including the Rolex Award for Enterprise, Forbes Enterprise Award, Discovery Award, and Sargent Shriver Award for Humanitarian Service. You aren't likely to find Dave on a bicycle, though. He's the guy in the cab of a truck loaded with bikes. Dave, welcome to DIY World Improvement. Thanks for coming into the studio this afternoon.
Thank you very much for having me here today.
I know that Pedals for Progress grew out of your experience in Ecuador as a Peace Corps volunteer in the 1970s, but you didn't actually start the organization until the early 1990s. Talk about the thought process and events that precipitated that.
Well, after I got out of the Peace Corps, I came home and established my life. After college, I went in the Peace Corps, I came home. I got married and I started a family and I started a business and things went very well for me. New Jersey's been very good to me. And I got to the point in my life where I was capable again of giving a little something back. And I would see bicycles in garbage cans every weekday. There's a bicycle in the garbage can there. And I thought back to my time in the Peace Corps where my landlord, Cesar Pena, had the only bicycle in town and how productive he was because he had wheels. I decided to try to collect 12 bikes and ship them back to Ecuador. And I like to say things have just gotten a little bit out of hand since then.
I seem to remember that you thought that wasn't going to be such a difficult thing to do, shipping 12 bikes to Ecuador, but it ended up being a little bit more complicated. What makes it so complicated?
Governments. Third world countries are often very poor for very good reasons, and a lot of times it starts with a government. But it's really hard to move goods through other people's ports without paying large amounts of tax for importing it into the country. As a small charity, we can't pay tax to bring things down that we're going to distribute to poor people. And although I started Pedals for Progress to ship bikes to Ecuador, actually have hardly ever done that. Less than 1% of my bikes have ever gone to Ecuador. I've concentrated more on countries which welcome my organization into their country.
Let's talk about how your model works, starting with the bike collections. How do the collections get organized?
If you're going to recycle everything, you can stay in town. But if you're going to recycle just one thing, bicycles, you have to do it very extensively. So we need to run collections all over. We need to get these bikes from individuals. So we need a good partner in every town. In Montclair, the Montclair Rotary Club for years has run bike collections. Groups all over. Join groups to do things. And if your group doesn't do anything, no one's going to want to be in your group. So all sorts of groups, whether it's Rotary clubs, civic groups, religious groups, schools, student groups, they want to do things. So what Pedals for Progress offers is a way to help you run a bicycle collection in your community. And at the end of the day, we'll bring all those bikes and we'll ship them overseas because we need people from each community to be able to do the publicity within town to communicate to the population that we're going to come and we're looking for some bikes.
Right. How many collections do you average a year, and how many bikes do you typically get in a collection?
Before the recession hit, we averaged about 130 collections a year. Now we're down into the high 80s, and we used to average about 90 bikes per collection. But in the last couple of years, we've been averaging closer to 55, 60. There are less people. We get a bike when someone buys a new one.
Right.
And bike sales have been down for the last couple of years, so our totals are down a little bit. But that demand has been suppressed, and as soon as the economy picks up, I'm expecting a spike in bikes available.
As you know, I dropped by a bike drive in Glen Ridge, New Jersey on a really beautiful Saturday in October before Hurricane Sandy came to visit. It was organized by a college student from Totowa named Derek Teixeira. The drive was held in a Starbucks parking lot on busy Bloomfield Avenue, not far from our studio here, and Derek took a few minutes to give me an interview. What made you decide to do the collection today? How did you find out about Pedals for Progress, and what made you decide to do the collection?
So for 2 years I didn't have a car, and I relied mainly on a bike to get around, and I kind of learned, its practical uses. Saves on gas, gets you place A to place B, and it's cheap and everything else. And when I finally got a car this past year, I said I want to give others that same enjoyment, So I was online looking for nonprofits in the area that did that kind of thing, and I happened to find Pedals for Progress, and I contacted, I believe it was Gary who I contacted, and he got me in touch with Beverly Merchant, who told me that I could host my own bike drive, and they would come pick the bikes up.
Yeah.
So that's exactly what I did. So we set a date up, which was today, from 1 to 4, and I made posters and flyers, put them at my Starbucks, and put it online, and that's how it came to be.
Okay, great. And you are a student at Montclair State, correct?
Yeah, studying anthropology at Montclair State.
Okay.
Graduating in May of 2013.
And, given that that's your major, and you know that these bikes are going to be going to, do you know where they're going to be going?
Nicaragua, actually.
Was the anthropology connection part of your decision to get involved in something like this?
Partly, yeah. I mean, we do mainly study the disenfranchised and those that don't have a real voice, compared to large businesses and governments and these kind of things. So to know these are helping those people drove me to want to do this kind of cause. So, and it turns out I actually had a trip planned for this winter break coming up to Nicaragua to study development in communities. We were going to go to a few places. One place was a garbage dump site. People live and they live off of it, and we're going to study that and help them. But it fell through. I couldn't afford the actual trip. But it's funny, because ironic actually, because the bikes we're collecting today are going to Nicaragua. So in a way, I still am doing what I hope to do.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you.
While I was there, I had a few minutes to chat with Gary Mitchell, your collections coordinator for New Jersey, and some of your other volunteers. Gary told me that you have some serious collection partners from outside the state of New Jersey. Talk a little bit about that.
The Green Mountain Return Peace Corps volunteers collect the state of Vermont, and FedEx Corporation delivers those bikes to New Jersey for free. I also have an amazing man, Tim Weitzel, in Dubuque, Iowa, and he collects the whole eastern half of Iowa. We found a trucking company that brings them in from Iowa for us at a very reduced rate. FedEx has been bringing about 300 bikes out of Vermont at no charge for at least 10 years. I like the Vermont bikes because if you live in the middle of the mountains, you have a good bike.
Once the bikes are collected and your volunteers show up at a bike drive and pick them up, what happens next?
All of the bikes are brought back to our storage facility in Glen Garden, New Jersey. We pack them into a warehouse, and then when we have enough bikes to fill an international shipping container, we bring a shipping container from Newark Port, and we load it up. This last Saturday, we loaded up 576 bikes for Rivas in Nicaragua. That's the 51st shipment I've made to that one town.
So those were some of Derek's bikes?
Yes, Derek's bikes left Saturday. They should have gone the week before, but I had a visit from Sandy.
Yeah, and that kind of disrupted things for you a bit, didn't it?
Well, we had a very, very good spring this year. The fall started out very hesitant. I think people were concerned about the election. And I was hoping right after the election that our production would pick back up. We were forced to cancel a number of collections in towns that, people are working on their own problems at the moment, not thinking about it. But we'll reschedule those collections for next spring, and we'll get those bikes just 6 months later.
And I think you said you had one more collection left this year.
Yeah, I have my last collection on Sunday in Trapp, Pennsylvania, and that was not canceled because luckily Trapp was not affected by Hurricane Sandy.
Do you do repair work on the bikes before you ship them out?
No, not really. What we do is we flatten the bikes. We make the bikes as small as possible. We take the pedals off and tie them to the frame. We turn the handlebars sideways so that we can compact the bikes and get as many as possible in a shipping container. Anywhere you go in the world, you can find someone who can fix a bike. And my goal is not really to deliver bikes to the developing world. Our goal is to create economic opportunity for people so that they can help themselves and become more productive. And the bike is a tool in doing that. The first thing that happens when a container arrives is there are a whole bunch of nationals of that country who have an immediate job putting the bikes back together. And the bike is an 18th century mechanism, and yes, anywhere in the world there is someone who can fix a bike.
And how are they distributed? Let's say Nicaragua, the shipment that just went off. Once they get there and they're put back into working order, how do they get to their new owners?
Our goal is greater economic development. The world is now capitalistic. If you're going to introduce a commodity to a marketplace with the goal of increasing the wealth of that economy, you got to sell it. So absolutely every one of our bikes is sold. We try to sell them at maybe 10% of what we think their value is. Mm-hmm. So our bikes go from anywhere from 25, 30 cents up to $200 or $300 because we ship bikes that originally sold for $2,000 or $3,000. Mm-hmm. Well, you can sell that bike for $200. And the reason is you can never discriminate. So when the bikes come into town, if the richest guy in town wants a bike, you can't say, oh, you're rich, you can't have one. You charge him a little more, and you use that money to supplement the cost of the other bike so you can keep the cost for the majority of the people as low as possible. We're trying to build a market. So we want everybody in town on a bike. We don't want just to get bikes for the poor people, but we want the middle-class people that are trying to hold a job and maybe someone who's a little richer. A middle-class person in Nicaragua probably only makes $2,000 a year. So,
and what kinds of things are you doing? Are you doing any social media? Are you doing events?
Our biggest event really are the bicycle collections, and we actually average about $12 per bike with a bicycle collection. I write newsletters, we write solicitation letters, we have a website, I give lots of speeches, I go out and speak to all sorts of different groups, and my stock answer, how I do it, is begging and groveling. It's really hard work. In the early days, you used to be able to get grants, but those have pretty much dried up. It isn't the same as it was in the 90s. But we have a few very, very large companies that are very generous to us, that believe in our mission. We scratch our way by.
What about partnerships? You must have partners in the countries where you are delivering the bikes.
Yes, in every country we have a partner organization, and they are the recipients of the container. We have a very lengthy contract with our partner organizations, and they're responsible for the distribution of the bicycles, which has to follow our guidelines. There can't be any discrimination to age or religion or sex or political affiliation or income level even. The bikes have to be there available to people, because as soon as you discriminate, you start walking down a very difficult path.
And are these NGOs? Are they local organizations? What kinds of organizations are they?
In the beginning, they were all NGOs, although the one in Nicaragua, we have turned it into a for-profit corporation because it is cheaper to bring in the bikes and pay the tax than it is to get around the tax by bringing them in as charitable goods. Mm-hmm. Because we end up paying so much more in shipping costs, and the tax on a container is only like $700, so it's easier to pay it. So that one is officially a for-profit, but all profit other than the salary is rolled into community affairs. These small organizations, they can't lose money because we don't have any money to lose. So they have to make a profit. Otherwise, you can't pay all the bills. And with that small profit, that you have to plan a profit because you can't afford a loss. When that profit occurs from the sale of the bike, we have built infant feeding centers, laid miles of potable water line, reforested hundreds and hundreds of acres of trees, built health clinics of different types, dug water wells. Our partner, when the profit is realized, has money to use, and they know what needs to be done in town. We only partner with nationals of the country. We will not partner with an American group overseas. And we do not partner with religious organizations either. Religious organizations' primary focus is not economic development. And we focus very much on economic development corporations.
So the bicycles become an engine of economic development in more than one way.
In many ways, because the partnering organization all of a sudden has money coming in, but But they got this mean guy in New Jersey who expects financial reports and a profit loss and a balance sheet. And what I say is, for our partners overseas, I start with these small organizations that have a mission, and then I teach them Business 101. You have to take the sale and put it in the bank and write a check and buy the part. You can't take the money and buy the part. You have to make the trail. And I develop these small organizations, so even though they're nonprofits, it's still a business. You still got to pay all the bills at the end of the day. I develop these nonprofits to be better operating organizations.
Your mission has evolved over the years in that you began collecting bicycles, but then back in 1999 you started collecting sewing machines. And you've distributed about 2,400 of those so far, including about 300 this year. When we were at the bike drive, there was one sewing machine, one old blue Singer sewing machine that got donated. What made you decide to branch out that way? Is there any difference in the way you distribute?
There's quite a bit of difference in the way we distribute. Our goal has always been to find a way to help these people help themselves. While we can feed the world, we can't support the world. And the only way to get out of poverty is to get a job. I tried many things. We've shipped computers, we shipped sporting goods, we shipped all sorts of things. But the sewing machine is a job right there in a box. And how it started was my wife inherited her mother's machine, and we were sitting at the dining room table, and I said, well, what are you going to do with the one we bought? And she said, I'm going to give it to our daughter. And our daughter said, I don't want that. And my son said, ship it to Nicaragua as a joke. That's when we started shipping sewing machines. And it turns out, just like bicycles, people love their bikes. They take care of their bikes. They keep them in the garage. I get bikes from the 1930s that are like new still. The same thing with sewing machines. People took care of sewing machines. My mother sewed. My wife did. When we were first married, I doubt my daughter ever will. These good, heavy-duty Singer sewing machines made out of steel in the 1960s and 1970s, well, Aunt Mildred's sewing machines up in the closet. We go around and people donate beautiful machines, including this year we shipped 7 treadle sewing machines. So those were pre-1910.
A sewing machine put me through college. My mother was a professional dressmaker, and I can't sew to save my soul, but I have a very serious appreciation for sewing machines. Now, you do have some issues. You have voltage issues with sewing machines, which you don't have with bicycles. How do you...
the Africans are so ingenious. I said to my friend Charles Mulamata in Uganda, I asked him about that, and he said, oh, well, I'll just make a step-down converter. And I said, you'll do what? He said, oh, well, you just take some copper wire and you wrap it around like this. And he made one in front of me. And it's, early electricity is also a product of the Industrial Revolution of the 1890s, when mechanization came into a lot of things, and these people overseas figured it out.
So you're currently distributing bicycles in 9 countries, if I remember right, and sewing machines in 14. How has your geographic distribution changed over the years, and what factors have influenced that?
I started this organization to ship bikes to Ecuador. I have been frustrated for 21 years, and there came a point when they had to go somewhere. So I fell back on what I knew, which is Spanish. So we started in Central America. The first 5-6 years, we were pretty much exclusively in Central America. I spoke the language. It was easy. I could make it work. And then I had a few people come after me saying, why aren't you doing anything in Africa? Africa has as many problems. Unfortunately, it's a little more expensive. It's a little farther. So we branched out into Africa, and we've shipped a lot of bikes to Africa. And then in the last few years, there have been opportunities in Eastern Europe. We started in the country of Moldova. Very, very poor country. As poor as the Ugandans are. Dirt-floored houses, and it does snow in Moldova. And we shipped a lot of bikes into Moldova, and we've started a program in Albania. And then most recently, after years of trying, we finally initiated a program in Vietnam, which was very difficult because the government of Vietnam is difficult. And I think there are a few of them that don't like us too much. But we've made a few shipments to Vietnam, so now we really are worldwide. I go where the world will let me go, because it isn't everywhere.
Is there anything that, with what you know now, that if you could go back and start over that you would change?
There's a few countries that I spent a lot of time working, trying to help, and I would have stuck more with the countries where the government is anxiously helping me. Because if the government doesn't want you in their country, no matter how much you want to help those people, you just can't get through the front door.
Leadership succession is one of the big issues for any nonprofit. It's part of sustainability. There will come a time when Dave is ready to move on. What are you going to do about that? Do you have your successor lined up?
You met Gary. He doesn't want to be president. I'll have to die to make him do it. Gary could run this organization. He doesn't want that job. I'm stepping back. I'm turning 60 this year. That's one reason Gary does a lot more of the collections. There is a great amount of physicality. We count our days on how many tons we move in how many hours. When we load a container, we move 12 tons in 5 hours. Something like that. A good year, we ship 300 tons of material around the world. So it takes young people. So I have a lot of high school kids who come help me load now, and I'm trying to step back from that. I certainly have Gary, who goes out and does collections, and he has a crew of people under him. And I have a new guy who I'm hoping will take over the warehouse, because it's the repetitive lifting of a 30-pound weight. I used to be good for 600 a day. 200 gets there.
And watching the guys throw those bicycles around the other day is, I get it. Well, listen, this is internet radio, so it's global. Tell people how they can get involved with Pedals for Progress.
We collect bikes all over the greater tri-state area here, and it's really easy if you're within our footprint. And you can just go to our website, p4p.org. You can find Bev from there. And we are already booking our spring collections, because we need to have collections all over the place. Collections are fun. They're one day for 3 hours, short and sweet. You start at 12, you end at 3, or you start at 9 and end at 12. And we have people who collect 200 bikes in 3 hours. The people of your community will come in, and they're so happy that there's something they can do with their bike, because people come into the collections and they care about their bike because it's still good. They just don't need it. They're so happy to know that it's going to someone who really needs it, and especially children. You get the 10, 12-year-olds come in that they just moved up to a 24-inch bike, but they got their old 20-inch bike. They got one hand on the old bike, one hand on the new bike, trying to figure out if they can let go. And you stop and you show them a brochure and you tell them what's going to happen to that bike. That some kid in Nicaragua is now going to go to school, or somebody in Guatemala can get to their fields. And they go home and they check us out on the internet and they follow their bikes. It's really a fun thing to do. We need other organizations to help us by holding a one-day event. A lot of Rotary clubs do it, a lot of church groups, a lot of synagogue groups, a lot of bat mitzvah projects, a lot of Eagle Scouts. Eagle Scouts get very serious about it. They do really well. It's a good project, and then they can follow the bikes, and you actually changes someone's life forever. A bicycle will lift someone permanently from poverty, or allow someone to get an education that they couldn't have otherwise, because they can get there.
Well, David, thank you for joining us in the studio, and thanks to all our listeners. We'll be back next week with another edition of DIY World Improvement. About the thought process and events that precipitated that.
Well, after I got out of the Peace Corps, I came home and established my life. After college, I went in the Peace Corps. I came home. I got married, and I started a family, and I started a business, and things went very well for me. New Jersey's been very good to me. And I got to the point in my life where I was capable again of giving a little something back. And I would seek
Discovery Award and Sergeant Shriver Award for Humanitarian Service. You aren't likely to find Dave on a bicycle, though. He's the guy in the cab of a truck loaded with bikes. Dave, welcome to DIY World Improvement. Thanks for coming into the studio this afternoon.
Thank you very much for having me here today.
I know that Pedals for Progress grew out of your experience in Ecuador as a Peace Corps volunteer in the 1970s, but you didn't actually start the organization until the early 1990s. Talk about For many of us in America, receiving and learning to ride your first bicycle was a milestone of childhood. Mine was a blue and white Huffy, a Christmas present from my grandparents. I still remember the day the training wheels came off. My next bike was a hand-me-down 3-speed from an older cousin, and I cherished it. Those bikes got passed down to siblings. Then in grad school, I bought a used 10-speed that survived 2 relocations before I sold it here in New Jersey 20 years ago. In the time since I sold my last bike, Americans have purchased an average of 17.4 million bicycles a year. At the same time, we've annually discarded millions. Many end up in landfills because no one seems to want used bikes anymore. Well, as we've heard on this show before, one man's trash can be another man's treasure, but sometimes it takes a DIY world improver to make that happen. Enter David Schweidenback of High Bridge, New Jersey, a former Peace Corps volunteer who founded Pedals for Progress. P4P is the world's largest recycler of bicycles, more than 136,000 during the past 22 years, including more than 3,200 so far this year. Dave is a CNN hero and the recipient of numerous awards, including the Rolex Award for Enterprise, Forbes Enterprise Award,